you all for being here, and thank you to Dave for kind of presenting all of this. And I think he's pretty much said everything, so hopefully my journey is going to be a lot less. But I'd like to thank you all for being here, and without you all, and for the members of kind of the SCAD participants, we wouldn't be here. Me and Dave wouldn't have that much to say. So what I'd like to do today, kind of for the next 20 minutes or so, and I'll go through my slides a bit quicker because I'm wearing heels and Dave was wearing flats, is to take you through the journey of SCAD research and what we've done so far. And essentially what I kind of want to focus on is where we've got so far, what's involved in the research day. Some of you have already been to the research day, which is fantastic, and kind of maybe give you a bit more input from what you've kind of got from that. What happens on the day, what happens after the day of research, we carry on working, we never go home. Some preliminary data that we've kind of got, and some of it Dave has mentioned, and I think will probably come in the question and answer session. And how can we help you, and how can you help us? So I started back in October last year, so it's been a year and a bit, and when I came to join the SCAD research, it was great because there was already a registry, there was patients, and there was about 70 patients, I think, on the registry at the time. And I'm glad to say that, kind of, looking up the numbers yesterday, we have 328 registrants to the SCAD website, and that's just a massive milestone within a year of how many people have registered. And I guess that goes because, one, there has been a lot more talk about SCAD, certainly me and Dave, and probably lots of our colleagues who hear about SCAD. When we go to talks, we promote the research, we give out leaflets, you talk to each other and you support each other, and therefore that enforces a lot more people to come to the website and register. And as far as I know, the majority of these patients, probably at least 300 plus, are actual SCAD survivors. Secondly, we've had lots of interest from Europe, and that's incredibly exciting because it just demonstrates that this is actually a success story. We've had people from the Northern Europe, we've had actually a few from Australia as well, so not completely committed to Europe. From then onwards, we've launched the questionnaire, and some of you have taken the time, and I am very, very grateful because recently I've looked at the questionnaire and there's lots of pages, so yes, and thank you for kind of taking the time to do it, but about 280 people or so have completed that questionnaire, which is very helpful medical information that we're collating to put for the SCAD research and what happens to patients with SCAD. I will give you a little kind of peek at the new website that's being launched, so sooner or later you'll find that we've got a new website that has much more interesting pages on it. It reads a lot better and it's much more friendly, and hopefully that will encourage more people to come onto the website and register and find more relevant information. Me and Dave have been working hard as making European friends. I think we found some Spaniards recently and some Italians, and we're trying to spread wings in Europe. So it's been fun talking to people in Europe and their experience in SCAD. And there is a lot of interest from our European counterparts when we go to conferences, and they want to do the research. So we're hoping to join forces and get a bigger research group going. And fantastically to say, I think when we started off this BHF grant, that the aim was to study 100 people, and so far we're almost halfway. So as of Monday, we'll be seeing our 50th patient, and that's just fantastic because we've literally really started seeing. Some of you were probably the first patients. I think one of you is in the crowd, one of our first patients that we saw, and it was only end of May, early kind of June we started seeing patients, and because of your responses and your interest, we've managed to get through halfway of the BHF grant study, and clearly we'd love to see more as the money comes rolling later on. So this is a peek of the new SCAD research website, a familiar photo that some of you are in, and hopefully it will be a bit more orientated towards patients, our actual research. Some of you have kindly massively donated to this research program by doing walks, marathons, events, and I think I'm not going to steal somebody's thunder about other things that may be happening later on, but there's been generous donations, and that's just great because it enables us to do more research and also help people and support them. So what happens before the research day? So a lot goes on, and I think this is not just me. I started off as a one person kind of running the SCAD research, and I'll be at the end, I'll show you who is around. There's a huge group of us now that works on this. So majority of you kindly come to the SCAD website and you register, and majority of these registrations are actually from patients rather than clinicians referring. However, we do get quite a lot of referrals, and especially recently, as Dave would probably nod and agree, he hands over lots of letters to me and goes, referrals, Abby, get them, basically. So people do register, and we get almost, I was saying this to the BHF party at the back, that we could probably get a registration a day now, so that just shows how kind of frequent registration has become. And I think it's because people now hear about SCAD and want to register, want to get involved. Following that, usually, hopefully, you'll get an email from me, and that follows by a link to the SCAD questionnaire. We've now evolved a bit further with technology, and we've actually created something called the SCAD mailbox. So it means you will probably, especially from future onwards, you should be getting an email from the SCAD mailbox to say, thank you very much for registering, we're very delighted to have you on board, and we'll send you a questionnaire, which is usually a link to an online questionnaire. Hopefully that questionnaire will be taken down, and we're working on it. And for those of you who've taken the time to do it, we are very grateful. But just to mention at this point, because I've got a lot of you in here, that probably some of the questions will change, and we might be sending you guys another short survey to do, just to help us kind of capture the right questions. So from then onwards, we send out more letters, so your post gets clogged a bit. So these are screening consent forms requesting kind of to access your medical data. And this is where it becomes a bit tricky, because following that, whether you've emailed me to say I've had my SCAD and it's been in this X hospital and this is a consultant, I spend a few hours on the phone talking to different people, and this is where I probably could do with some help, please. Because unfortunately, as much as people do want to help on the other end of the line, it's usually going through a phone call that ends on a voicemail, no one picks it up till 3 days later, and then you're just chasing one person after the other. But that's probably the lengthiest and the most difficult process that we have to go through when we try to retrieve your data. Once we have the data, which is usually the medical information, the angiogram, ECGs, and wherever else we can get hold of, we look at them and we verify, yes, this is a definite SCAD, and we kind of send you an email along and say, yep, we're happy to see you, let us know when you can come in. And I think earlier when we started this off, I think it was Becky, that's it, you put a Facebook message to say, email Abby if you want to come, and I think I got about hundreds of emails, and I've now responded to everyone's emails, and if I haven't, do catch me and go, you haven't responded to my email. So do keep on emailing me, and actually it will be the SCAD mailbox, which we will be sending out. Once the website is on, it will be the email to kind of email to, and it would be picked up by an administrator, so not just myself. So there'll be a lot more people looking at it, and hopefully you'll get a quick response than my 3 a.m. responses at the moment. Right, so confirmation email follows, and then we tend to send you some patient information sheet and a consent form to say this is what we're going to do, and if you're happy, let us know. For those of you who've come up, we request for you to come fasted, ideally because we want to run some of the tests first thing in the morning, at least being kind of 4 to 6 hours fasted. I know in some of you take medications, and we've kind of not said not to take your medications, to carry on taking your medications, but just avoid food or breakfast or coffee at least for half an hour before we put you back into the canteen. Following that, my colleagues do tend, I think you guys are great at organising your travel arrangements, but there is a support for travel arrangements and kind of asking any questions prior to coming. And then you arrive at your research date. So this is a picture, sorry Dave, we didn't include you in because we couldn't find you, basically. But this is, without much, well, you've got Elaine in blue, she's our wonderful SCAD nurse, and you've got Anna Marie, who's our physiologist, who you guys who've been around, I think they're in the back. Can I get you guys to stand up, please, and introduce yourself? So you don't know, well, at the beginning I think it was just me, and now there is lots other people to meet as well, and Becky President. And then Leicester Cardiovascular Biomedical Research Unit is where we direct you to, so I thought I would put that right at the beginning so you know where to come. And there are signs for toilets and restaurants as well. So we introduce you to the Biomedical Research Unit, we pick you up from there, and then whisk you across Glenfield. I think majority of you get a tour of Glenfield by the end of it, because we've taken you to the restaurant, to the bathrooms, to the other side of the hospital, the library. I think Ellie takes people other places too, I'm not going to ask where. But you do see all of Glenfield. You do see all of Glenfield. So this is just a quick summary, and I'll go through what is involved in every stage. So the arrival, we kind of greet you, and we note that you haven't had breakfast, and a lot of you are kind of a little bit unhappy because you want your caffeine in as soon as possible, so we try to be quick. get you consented, and then do some of the imaging. And I'll go through what this imaging is, but very quickly, a lot of it is ultrasound of the vessels in your arm and your neck. We also do MRI imaging, and some of you would have had CT imaging or will go on to have CT imaging. And the rest of the day involves doing some clinical history, examination, looking at your fingers, how bendy you are, and getting you to stand against walls and measuring you. Also, optional within that is that some of you have been very kind, and we hope this will continue to kind of donate some skin, and I'll kind of show some pictures that David's also shown as to what we're trying to do with them. We hope to carry on also doing some pictures of the retina, so the back of the eye. Within that day, we also take some bloods for biobanking, and that's to look at your genes and what could be causing the SCAD from a genetic perspective. And then I think at the end of the day, for those of you who've been there, we normally sit kind of at the end with a cup of coffee or tea and look at two big screens that will hopefully have your angiogram and your MRI scan. So we go through all the results and what we've so far found from the day through your questions, and a lot of it is kind of medications. I think Dave has gone through a lot of it and will probably come back a bit later. So what is the ultrasound test for? So I think that for those of you who've had it, it kind of looks like this. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the person who was taking the pictures to take a picture of Ellie having this done the other day, so this will do for time being. It's essentially, we lie you down on a couch, we make you as comfortable as possible. We switch off the lights, and I think Anna Marie and I try not to sing, but yeah, we have tried to provide better ambience and kind of relaxing environment for this test, because we need you very much relaxed for it. And essentially it involves putting a blood pressure on the forearm and a probe that sits on top of the arm to look at the artery, which is called the brachial artery that runs down the arm. So why do we do that, and what's the point of it? So this is a study that's been done in many conditions, and essentially by studying what happens to the brachial artery when the cuff goes up and it's released, it will inform us as to the function of the cells and how the vessel relaxes and constricts. What's known so far is that normally when you put a blood pressure cuff, you reduce the blood flow down the arm, and when you release the cuff, the increase in flow down the arm will cause the blood vessel upstream, which we're scanning essentially, to dilate, and that's what we're looking at when we're looking at your vessels. So this is essentially what it looks like, and a lot of you do ask us, oh, does it look normal? And it's very difficult to tell by looking at just your imaging, because actually it's sub-millimeter changes. And that's why we kind of have to put it into a software to have a look at what are those sub-millimeter changes. Is it normal? Is it abnormal? Do we know that this fits in with your condition? Is this something that is new that's not been described before? And at the moment it's very difficult to say that we know very much about it, because it's very variable in different people. A lot of you guys are on medications, so there is a lot of variation in that data. The next bit of our ultrasound is ultrasounding the neck. So we kind of look at the vessel in the neck. So these are both the carotid arteries, and what we're measuring here is the thickness of the carotid, the thickness of the lining of the carotid artery. Also within that, what we're looking at is how the artery moves as it relaxes and constricts as the blood goes through. And you'll hear lots of noises as we do this, because we kind of measure the flow as well. Don't know, Anna Marie, did you want to add anything else to that?
No. You forgot to mention the ultrasound gel has
Oh yeah, the ultrasound gel. Yeah. So for those of you who've had it, me and Anna Marie are going to become rich one day and take over L'Oreal, because the jelly we use has very much moisturising properties and it's a good makeup remover, so it's our bid to become rich. So once we finish the study, we're selling that gel off, basically. Right. So following that, we don't actually rush you to the next thing. We tend to normally switch you to the canteen and make sure you're watered and you're fed and you've got your coffee on board and ready to carry on with the rest of the day. And usually the rest of the day is further imaging, and that's then MRI scan. So that's actually our MRI scan at Glenfield Hospital that we tend to use, and it's the 3T MRI scanner, so a very detailed MRI scanner. I think some of you have previously slightly struggled thinking, oh gosh, how am I going to sit there, lie there for about an hour? It's a very hollow, small tube. I've been there. For some people it's quite soothing, for some people it could be claustrophobic. I guess for those of you who are thinking about coming to research and worried about the MRI aspect, don't be, because we're very happy to give a bit of sedation. We've all had it in the research group. I'm not sure if Dave has been in it yet or not. We're all coming in again. But, and we're very happy to give a bit of sedation, which is it just makes you a bit more comfortable. It feels like having a few glasses of wine, and you know, we don't tend to sing to, well, I don't sing to anyone during the MRI scan because I think that would be quite worrying. But it's not too bad from what I hear. So we get very pretty images as a result of it. What we tend to do is scan the head of the neck, so we basically scan all your vessels in the brain, all the vessels in the neck, all the vessels kind of leaving from top of the heart all the way down to the legs, and we also image your heart. And this is a lovely image of somebody actually of their circle of Willis, so basically the kind of the blood supplying the brain. And what we look for there is, are there any aneurysms, are there any abnormalities, is there anything that looks different to what it should be? And these are the vessels of the head and neck, so these are the carotid vessels or the vertebral vessels that kind of leave the heart from the aorta and make up these branches in the brain. And again, we're looking for any abnormalities in them. And this is, again, an image of somebody we taken, and it was of the aorta, and you can see that you've got a lovely arch that goes across all the way down. And we follow this down, kind of all the way down into the legs, and again, looking for if there are any obvious vascular abnormalities. So then we come to looking at the heart with MRI scan, and it might, I don't have a little laser to show, but essentially this demonstrates different, the chambers at the top bit is the 4 chambers of the heart, and we can look at the heart in different cross sections and look at the actual function of the heart. So this is probably a bit better than the echo imaging, though I'm not an echoist, so I'm not going to offend anyone by saying that right now, I hope. And we can look into detail as to how well the function of the heart is preserved, if there is any damage, is there any muscle that doesn't move, is there any abnormalities with the valves, is there anything else basically. So it's great for detail. Through this as well, I don't know if this comes out well where you've got the red arrows, where it's white it shows that there is damage, and we're able to do that with the MRI scanning that we do. So Dave talked about the function of the heart, the ejection fraction, how well is the pumping of the heart, and by looking at the scar and the damage, that also gives us a lot of clinical information as to what's happened from the SCAD. Has there been any permanent damage left, or no damage left at all, or what is the extent of the damage? So I think briefly Dave did mention CT scanning and what the CT scanning shows us in terms of the healing of the vessels. So CT scans are great, they produce very beautiful pictures, and in some of you guys who've had them already and have seen your pictures, it basically shows, well, all of you guys who've had the CT scans on a clinical basis so far, we've demonstrated that the vessels have healed, and it's very pretty and very beautiful, and it doesn't hurt or cause any discomfort. It's just going through another tube. Right, following that, there is an opportunity to take some bloods. We tend to do this at the time of the MRI, so we take some bloods and we send them to the lab, and essentially that's to look at the genetic aspects and as to what causes SCAD or what could be contributing to it. And also there is a component of the optional skin biopsy. So the skin biopsy, I think we've had so far about 30 people out of the 50 who've actually undergone a skin biopsy. And Dave has shown some pictures already of the actuals. Those were definite pictures, weren't they, of patients who've arrived. This is my made-up pictures, basically. But essentially what we're looking at in the skin biopsy is the collagen. The collagen is the kind of the glue that sticks everything together, and to see if there is any abnormality in the collagen that actually leads to spontaneous coronary artery dissection. Is it a bit too much? Is it too little? Is there a change in the type? Is it clusters of these collagens are different? Is it the way they are organized? Does that make people more stretchy? Does that make people more bendy? Does that make your arteries more flexible? And this is what we're trying to find out by doing the skin biopsy. And our clever colleague, who's not here today, she also takes this and she grows some fibroblast, well, the aim is to grow some fibroblast cells out of these which produce the collagen, so we can replicate your own collagen and put it under different external stimuli, i.e. under different hormones, to see what actually happens and how that influences the collagen production. Then we come on to retinal photography, so hopefully we're going to take this on board and do a bit more, and essentially what it involves is sitting behind the camera, and for us to kind of click a button when we're happy we can see the back of your eye. Prior to that, if you are driving, we wouldn't be able to do it. If you were planning to drive kind of afterwards, we wouldn't be able to do it, and we'd recommend that you be off driving for at least 24 hours because we dilate the pupils during this. However, I think a few of you who've had it done, it's the kind of by the time you've left, actually, everything has returned to normal, but just be aware that if you may have a bit of a funny vision if you were to have this done during the day. And then we come to the clinical phenotyping. So there's a lot of stuff we tend to do with you for a day. So it's a long day, but hopefully lots of fun for the person involved as well. So this is the bit where we concentrate on the history, what happened at the time, what were you doing, how you presented to the hospital, the ECGs that kind of you presented with, and your journey of the actual SCAD. And I think it's also very emotional. For some of you, this is a time where it's very emotional and you react quite a bit to it. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's probably a safe environment for you to talk about your SCAD to someone who probably understands SCAD and sees SCAD, and hopefully that's seen as a positive. During that time, we also do lots of other measurements. We kind of take your height and your arm span. I think I've created a graffiti wall where I measure everyone's arm spans for those of you who've seen it, and some of you who will come to see it. I'll paint it before I leave, Dave, don't worry. And then we do weight and blood pressure and heart rate. And then I ask you to do different movements with your joints, kind of checking whether you are more hypermobile or you can do certain party tricks, and show me how long your fingers are. So yeah, those are part of the examinations that we undertake. So that probably concludes what we do in a research day. It's a full-on day. For those of you who've taken part, I hope it's been beneficial and you get something out of it. And then following that day, what we actually sit down and do, we analyse some of the data that we get. There is a lot of reporting to be done because if you've had MRI scans, CT scans, these will need to be reported. Not all of them are done by me, so I need to chase lots of people around the hospital and go, can you please report these? So we can generate some letters. And I do stand here and apologise because I know a lot of you haven't had a summary letter yet, but it is to come, and we have recovered a dictaphone that works, so hopefully that will speed me up. Hopefully also you will receive some follow-up calls from Ellie, who's now recruited into the SCAD team, to check a week later if you've had a skin biopsy, if everything is okay, if there are any problems, and just to kind of check off on you if there are any issues or any questions that you had. We talked to you guys about this during your visit, about the clinical follow-up, and I think Dave mentioned this as well. A lot of you guys are interested in coming back to clinic and kind of going through SCAD, and I guess this would be an opportunity to kind of when I write the summary letter, I kind of suggest it to your GPs if they want to refer you on, we'd be happy. And I guess for you guys to take it on with your doctors is to come back to Leicester to see us again if you wanted to. So I just wanted to share really some preliminary data that we've actually got, and this is thanks to you guys who've made the journey to come up to Leicester to see us. And essentially this is a reflection of what we have seen, which we're very grateful for. So far from what we have seen, I can tell you that actually you don't all look the same. So it might be you finding to some people that not everyone with SCAD looks the same or has the same phenotype. And that's very interesting in itself. By seeing almost the 50 patients that we have seen, I can actually categorize these people. I think I got to my 10th patient and I went, oh my God, there is a trend here, basically. That actually this can be broken up into 4 different groups. The way I describe them, and this may not be completely the correct way to describe them, but it's my kind of nomenclature for description, is that I see SCAD in the young, and these are just people who are not pregnant, not perimenopausal, don't have any hormonal influence, haven't just had a baby. And this applies to some of you sitting in this crowd today. We've also seen SCAD in patients who are kind of in the peri and postpartum, and actually I think most are postpartum and not the peripartum period. And we also, I think the majority fall within the perimenopausal period actually, and then there are the men, which there are a few of you. How did we derive this data? So I apologise for doing a bit of GCSE biology, but it really did help me and Dave when we were looking at this data to kind of figure out what happens to hormones.
Especially me.
And I apologise to the men because this is not completely applicable to you for the time being. So what happens to women in a menstrual cycle, I think as women we're very complicated, and I think I can say that because I'm a woman here, basically. So a lot of things happen in our body. It's not just a menstrual cycle. Our ovaries go through kind of a phenomenal change within that period cycle, where basically an ovum matures and then it's released from the ovary to be ready for essentially fertilization. During that time, I don't know if any of you noticed during ovulation, your temperatures go up by at least a kind of half a degree to a degree. So for those of you who go, gosh, I feel like I'm, at young age, I'm hitting menopause. You're not hitting menopause. Your flushing symptoms are related to a genuine physiological change. Also, within that time, apart from just the ovaries and the change in the body temperature, there is a change in hormones, which is a change in the estrogen and the progesterone. What we see is that the estrogen peaks in the early days up to ovulation, and then progesterone follows from that, and then kind of towards the 10 days before the period starts, both hormones fall. Why is this important? Well, I'll come to that in a second. And this is essentially a demonstration of all the hormonal changes to a woman during her lifetime, which we go through a lot of changes. So essentially, we spend a lot of years from kind of childhood to puberty with estrogen going up and up and up, and then we go through lots of cyclical changes every month. So it is kind of hard being a woman, actually. And then being pregnant, where hormones go flying up again and then they fall. It depends on how many pregnancy one goes through. And then comes a time, there is something called perimenopause, where the hormones change again and fluctuate up and down. And then you hit menopause and everything settles. So you spend all your life kind of going up and down and up and down. And then, so looking at each phase by itself, well, what happens in perimenopause is that you're running a normal estrogen and progesterone level that changes every month. Then progesterone suddenly starts to fall at perimenopause, and then estrogen catches up. So some of you who complain of the the flushing and the sweating, well, that's the estrogen fluctuating up and down until you hit the postmenopausal phase. And this is what happens with pregnancy. So with pregnancy, both hormones massively rise up, both estrogen and progesterone, until the delivery, and wham, both hormones fall. So by taking your histories as to when you've had your scans, I have come to realise that actually, majority of you, and this is not completely exclusive to what I've seen, majority of you have had, if you're young, you've had your scans just around the time of your period, or just before your period. For those of you going through the perimenopausal stage, you've all reported to me this is the time your periods are becoming irregular, and there is a change, and you're going through the perimenopause. Certainly, there seems to be more in favour of the ones who are pregnant and have had their scans. It tends to be mainly postpartum or towards the end of kind of the third trimester. It's definitely not in the first or the second trimester. And that in itself suggests that there is a certain hormonal etiology, and that's why me and Dave can sit down and think we can break this down into several groups. And I'm sorry to say for the men, we're not quite sure yet what's going on. But I do think there is an exercise component for all of you, but in particular the men of whom I've seen two so far, that you're all very physically fit, and I don't know whether you're genetically made up to be very physically fit, or there is some association there. What we've also noticed by just sitting there and taking some histories from you, that there are many of you who do have cyclical symptoms, and that's not for everybody. Some of you come and see me and say, every month I get chest pain, and sometimes you represent to hospitals again and again. It tends to be mainly just before your period, so in the luteal phase, and that's quite interesting because it suggests it is a change in the hormones, and certainly the fall of both of the hormones can be causing this. What we have found, and we've trialled, and I think Dave briefly spoke about this, that some of you who we've trialled the Mirena coils with, you did improve and your symptoms kind of did settle down. So Mirena is not only just used for kind of managing heavy periods, but it could be actually useful for kind of managing these symptoms, and I think we'll answer some questions around that in the Q&A. We've also, I think Dave mentioned the role of kind of stopping the beta blockers and using a calcium channel kind of tablet to relax the arteries in patients who do have the recurrent symptoms, to see if that helps. And we think the etiology behind that may be spasm, and it may be related to both those hormones changing. So what have we got from some of our imaging data? Well, interesting, we haven't done a huge amount of CTs yet. We've done them on a clinical basis, but we've seen healing of the dissections, and I think the earliest I've seen is somebody who's had a CT around 4 weeks, and there was complete healing. And I think that's really interesting. And I think we've actually published an abstract recently as a result of that information. And that actually aids our clinical management, and I think Dave briefly touched on that as well. So, as a result, so we also do lots of MRIs, and for those of you who've been there, you spend about an hour in the MRI scanner, but it's worth it, because what we can tell you at the end is how much damage there is being to the heart, what's the function of the heart and the kind of the pumping muscle of the heart, and also if there is any abnormalities in any of the other vessels. And what I can tell you so far, that actually what's very interesting, that majority of you, especially the ones that have had conservative management, there isn't a huge damage to the muscle of the heart. If we were to see this in somebody who's having a heart attack, and I've discussed this with my MRI colleague a few times, that, you know, kind of a vessel occluded, we'd expect to see a lot more damage to the muscle of the heart. And actually in the SCADs, we don't see that. We see very tiny or sometimes minimal. And I kind of, you know, it is striking, because I think that just demonstrates there's a completely different pathophysiology to SCAD and the conventional heart attack. We've also kind of using the MRI, we're picking up on if there is any vascular abnormalities, and I think Dave mentioned this earlier, that these abnormalities tend to be subtle. Certainly we haven't got a huge number who've got any aneurysms or anything in particular. And I think to some extent it's informative clinically, because if there is something wrong, we can tell you, we can kind of try to treat it, or at least refer you to a person who can manage this better than us. And also, just going back to the kind of the clinical aspect of it, so apart from realising that you all are very, very different, and maybe we can categorise you into several groups, that there are some of you are incredibly hypermobile, and that's interesting. Also, that some of you do suffer from quite a lot of side effects from medications, and I think being young and fit and being put on industrial doses of medications is probably not the best way to manage a young patient. Certainly, I think this is not looked at very well by the kind of the cardiology and the medical professionals. It's the post-traumatic stress, the depression and the anxiety that you've all mentioned. When you come and see us, the majority of you have a bit of a breakdown when you come and go through your story, and that's not a bad thing. I think it's a good thing, because it kind of allows you to talk about it to somebody who probably understands SCADs and appreciates what you're going through. But also for us to kind of help refer you on to your GP and say, actually, can you do something about this, because this person could do with a bit more support, or put you in touch with each other to kind of talk about it and help. So that's essentially the preliminary data. I haven't put any figures to it because I need to do lots of analysis, and Dave keeps on chasing me on that. So until that point, I will then hopefully by next year I'll have some numbers and figures to add on to that. So what do we want to develop? Well, from this research, we wanted kind of what we want to develop, and we're already doing this, is educating our cardiology professionals. So that's not just the doctors, that's the kind of the junior doctors who see the patients, also the nurses kind of who look at cardiac rehab, etc., who look after patients and do the post-care of any patient who has a heart condition. I think that's not very well done at the moment in the world of SCAD. Also extending that education to other medical professionals, so this could be the gynecologists, the obstetricians who come across young women with heart disease, but also paramedics who actually are first responders who see you, and your GPs who you may present to, where they don't really know anything about SCAD. A lot of you have normal ECGs when you see a medical first aid responder or a GP, and therefore, because they don't know about it or they're not thinking about it, it may be kind of underdiagnosed or not diagnosed initially. The ideal situation would be one day, because of the linkage with the different medical professionals, to have a kind of a specialised rehab program for SCAD patients. As young patients, I believe certainly that a different rehab program is needed, because you're much fitter, so you can't be put in with somebody who's much older, who's not fit, who's been smoking, and kind of doesn't have the healthy lifestyle that you've led before. And I think that would be important, and something I hope we will be able to achieve from the research and the work that everyone else is doing. I think understanding the psychological impact and providing support is essential. As everyone has Sally mentioned, and I think Dave mentioned, and everyone else, your head and your brain work together, and you need both of them to work well to be able to function. So I think, even if your heart is working well, if psychologically you're not doing well, then it's very difficult. And I think the aim is to kind of get up a proper referral service so that there is a SCAD specialist clinic. I know Dave is going to hate me for this, but we're going to fill up your clinic with lots of SCADs one day, and that's all you'll see. But I think that helps because I think that's how we learn, and I think that's where patients get probably the best care from somebody who knows about the condition. How can you help? Well, please carry on kind of with anyone you come across. The registry is very, very important because the more patients we have, the more we'll understand and come to better conclusions. Essentially, for those of you who haven't done the questionnaire or will get the new questionnaire or an edited form of the questionnaire, please do answer those questions because they do help us collect appropriate data. If anyone has kind of their angiograms or kind of discharge letters before they come up to the consultation, it would be incredibly helpful because I struggle because all hospitals want kind of hospital numbers and dates of births and addresses, and it'd be just very helpful to have the minimum information there, or if you have your angiograms or you've managed to get it, it would help to send it to us before the research day so we don't spend hours trying to do it with other hospitals. Do attend the research day, so I think for those of you who haven't and thinking about it or haven't sent us dates that would work, please do come. I only have this data because I've seen you. I couldn't have come up with this if I hadn't seen you. And this data can only improve, or we can understand the disease better by seeing you guys. Do contact us if you have any issues or any problems after your appointment, so it doesn't end there. The journey carries on, essentially. And also, if I could ask for the SCAD kind of participants, if you have any friends that are kind of similar age, similar height and weight, or just who no medical problems at all, can you promote them to become healthy volunteers to the research study? It would massively help. We need a control arm to the study. I think they'd keep you company for the day, so that might be nice as well. There'll be a day out to Glenfield. Right. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you, and I think my biggest thank you is to all the SCAD participants. This really couldn't have happened without you. But also to thank kind of a whole list of my colleagues who've actually now, it used to be just me, and Dave, now it's lots more people who actually have helped set up, improve SCAD research and kind of the daily running of it, and I hope this list will only grow. So thank you.